Good afternoon. Welcome to the AICPA Town Hall update on the CARES Act and Paycheck Protection Program. I'm Eric Askerson, one of the AICPA executives overseeing our CARES and PPP activities. Communicating and connecting has never been more important, so we greatly appreciate the opportunity to be with you and to share some timely updates and information. Before we get going, let me just cover a couple of housekeeping items. You absolutely can earn CPE for today's webinar. Just click on 75% of the random checks throughout the webinar. And also, there will be a post-event email sent to you with information on how you can print out the certificate. A couple of additional helpful hints. You see a toolbar at the bottom. You can use that to adjust your volume. You can also use that to ask questions, and we greatly encourage you to bring us questions. We've got a team here, an expert team that are going to be actively responding to those questions. We will try to take some of those questions live as well. And if you're having a technical issue with the webinar, please let us know and we'll respond to that as well. You also can download the materials with that orange download button. So with the housekeeping done, I'd like to now introduce who will be participating on today's webinar. First, it's me, Eric Askerson. I'm the CEO of CPA.com. And I play a broader role supporting the overall ecosystem and business and technology strategies here at the AICPA. And to say the least, this is a very, very important time for all that I'm doing and we're doing, and I appreciate this opportunity to be with you. Mark Koziel is the individual who leads all firm activities for the AICPA. I can tell you this. He's been going nonstop over the past month, so welcome, Mark.
Thanks, Eric. Look forward to it.
And we have Barry Melanson with us today. You all know him. He's the CEO of the AICPA as well as the CEO of the broader association. Barry's been talking to us a lot over the past couple of years about the pace of change, and we really are in a very unique period right now. So, Barry, welcome.
Thank you, Eric, and glad to be with both you and Mark, and most importantly with more than 2,000 members to talk about some of these issues.
Thanks, Barry. So this is what we're looking to cover today. We're going to kick it off with a broad status of how we're seeing things related to CARES and PPP. We'll also be talking about some of the most recent guidance. There was even an FAQ that was released this morning that we'll be discussing. We then have assembled, a few of the top questions that we've been receiving from firms, which we've been receiving during these webinars. And Barry, I, and Mark are going to discuss those. And then we're going to get into, the broader AICPA resources and tools. And at the end, we're going to have an open discussion and answer as many of your questions as we can. And what we'll be doing is we'll be analyzing the question sets for patterns and trying to answer a few of the broad themes that are coming in through the Q&A button. So this slide here just indicates the incredible pace and frequency of activities over the past month. I mean, the CARES Act, the law, is not even a month old, and there's just been so much going on related to new guidance. We understand that there's lots of questions. There's lots of issues out there, and there's frustrations. There's frustrations with some of the firms, and there's frustrations clearly with your clients. A lot has occurred. Over 1.7 million businesses have successfully made it through the PPP application process, with $350 billion being approved in those applications. And the next batch of funding is about to be released. It looks like the House will be passing the Senate bill later today, and the President will be signing it into law. So what we're thinking about is the relaunch of this program, and making sure we're doing everything we can to be ready for it. I mean, just more broadly, this is a very important moment in time for the profession, for the firms, to support small businesses. We all saw the numbers today, over 25 million unemployed. So this is just an opportunity for us to play our role as finance and accounting professionals to support the overall American economy. And what we're going to be bringing today to you is information based on our engagement with this broad group of stakeholders. You've seen this slide before, but we are having daily discussions with the governmental entities, with the firms, with the core information providers, the payroll group and others, as well as with the lenders. And what these groups are doing for us is they're helping us inform you of what's going on. They're also helping us make recommendations. Some of the recommendations we're making to SBA and Treasury, we're working out with our coalition partners, and we're also just working together. Everyone's got good intent, the lenders, the information providers, clearly the firms and the government officials, and we're all working together to really implement the PPP program as well as some of the other elements of the CARES Act. Here's the latest coalition slide. Right now, this represents over 3.5 million, this group of entities represents over 3.5 million businesses and 75 million employees. And we are, holding regular dialogue with them. They are helping us work through some of the things around the forgiveness documents, the forgiveness calculations. Mark Cozio is going to be speaking to you about that. But we put together a task force with this group to help us think through that and to get some of this information and input to the governmental officials. So we're all well aware of this. I mean, this is the Senate bill that passed on Tuesday, $484 billion of new funding, $310 billion related to the PPP program. There's also a special carve-out for funds that will be delivered through credit unions and financial institutions with less than $50 billion in assets. So, Mark, I know your team's always looking at all the new guidance and new acts that are coming out. Any additional comments from you on this?
Yeah, I mean, we were hopeful that with the passage of the new bill would be additional details or the opportunity to clean up some language from the first bill. There's been nothing changed as far as policy goes with this, so it's just another monetary injection and the current existing rules. So, we'll talk about it as we get into forgiveness, but we are involved with SBA, Treasury, trying to get answers as the first bill came out. So we won't see anything new out of this bill yet, but we are hopeful for FAQs and other means after.
Thanks, Mark. And Barry, before we get into these questions, I want to ask you a broad question. I mean, you've been, watching this process from prior to the CARES Act becoming law, and in the discussions with all of the leaders of these different stakeholders. So just some broad perspective on how you've seen things shape out over the past month and where we're headed over the next coming weeks.
Thank you, Eric. I would say maybe a few thoughts. First off, I think we have to always keep going back. I know there's a lot of uncertainty, and I think both you and Mark laid that out well just a few moments ago. There is a lot of uncertainty. I do think you have to come back to the best of intentions, and we're a profession that wants to. If you work in a business, you want to do it right. If you advise a business, you want to do it right. And that is certainly our mantra, right? We sort of are known for that as a profession, wanting to give the best answers possible. This is a high degree of uncertainty, and I think even the people with best intentions, members of Congress, heads of agencies, they're just, there's so many things happening, and they're just so inundated with what's going on. Not only with CARES and PPP, but a whole, slew of different things that are so critically important to all of us, really, to our livelihoods and the effectiveness of our economy. And so I think I would ask, and I have said this in some of our member videos, I just think we have to keep that in mind as professionals today. What's the intent? And to try to work within sort of the parameters that we have. This is not like a tax law. This is not something where we're going to have, case law and regulations and detailed codes and subchapters and all of those types of things that really we could point to in giving specific answers or specific advice to clients. It really is a degree of uncertainty, and it probably will be a degree of uncertainty all the way through the end of this program. When all of the loan forgiveness is there, there's still going to be a degree of uncertainty. I think our voice has been, Eric, about, first off, we were very strong advocates that this should be essentially a grant program. Small business entrepreneurs, I believe very strongly, are critical to the recovery, and I believe that they don't want to really be in a debt situation. There's enough uncertainty about that. So I would say that that clearly was the intent of Congress, to help small business through this process without the burden of how to figure it out after they've been hurt, but rather the ideal of them operating and remaining in business and helping be part of the recovery. And I think with that in mind, we know, and we're going to get into forgiveness, there's a lot of nuances that are very, very critical to small business. And I think members in Congress, and particularly the action right now has been in the Senate, but members in Congress and the heads of Treasury and the SBA and their very talented teams and are all aware of that. And it's just a volume issue. But at the same time, our voice is to try to say, but it's really critical to these small businesses to have at least some degree of more clarity. And I think it's true with the banks. The banks, early on when this program was set up, they were trying to do the right thing. That it was just an avalanche of activity that was, brought to the financial institutions of this country. So I keep coming back to that, and I encourage our members to really pause and think about what's the intent, and that this is not like a tax act, or this is not like an accounting standard. This is something that has a degree of grayness in it that will continue, and that's really where our value is as a profession, to help our clients, or if we work for a company, our employers, to work through some of that grayness, if you will, in and with the best of intentions and understanding the intentions of what's trying to happen. So you're probably going to get tired of hearing me say that, but that really is the scenario that we're in. And we're doing everything we can, and the team is doing everything we can to bring some clarity. But we have to accept the fact that there's going to be a degree of lack of clarity, no matter how much this moves along. So that would be my overall comment, Eric.
Yeah, thanks, Barry. Very, very helpful perspective as we now move into these more, detailed buckets of questions. So we're going to start with something that I've already seen coming in through the Q&A is, direction. Can you help provide some direction on how the forgiveness calculations and documentation will be done? So, Mark, I know you're working on that, so why don't you share these next two slides?
Thanks, Eric. And it's amazing how fast we've shifted into the forgiveness aspect of this for a lot of our members. There are a lot of questions, a lot of detailed questions asking it, and I do think for all of us to keep in mind exactly what Barry said and the concept of this program, assuming positive intent. It is the goal of the SBA to help fund payroll during a certain period of time. That was the number one goal out of this program. And yes, they included some additional items such as rent or mortgage interest, and then there was even some discussion around equipment, lease interest only, not any of the equity that comes out of that. So always assuming that. And so folks are asking questions like, can I have garbage fees included in utilities? I don't believe it's the SBA's intent or the bank's intent to have you analyze and dissect every single bill. If you have a governmental entity that is charging your client for water and sewer and garbage all on one bill, I'm going to say that bill is probably includable in what it is that you're going to do for utilities. But there are no clear answers, nor do I expect to see anything from Treasury or the SBA that's going to give you that amount of finite detail. We're going to keep pushing, and we have pushed to get answers. So we gave the example, Eric's given the example of the Small Business Coalition. that was created. We tried to create generally accepted answers before they even came out from SBA. We were ahead of it a little bit when we were talking about gross payroll. We even had some of our members say that we were reading that incorrectly, and that turned out to be what was from guidance from SBA and Treasury after the fact. We are trying to insert our generally accepted ideas coming from us, coming from the payroll processors that are out there, to the SBA and to Treasury, trying to get ahead of that. But we're not getting answers as to when the actual guidance is going to come out. We're trying to time the concepts that we're coming up with close to what SBA and Treasury does, so that if there is any type of reconciliation, if there's something that we say that the Treasury didn't necessarily agree with, that we didn't get our members too far out in front of this and have to make adjustments. So it's been a very fine line that we're walking to be able to get to that point. But we are making recommendations. Eric mentioned a subset of our coalition. We met yesterday to talk about, absent any guidance from Treasury, how is it that we should handle some of these items. So I'm going to kind of insert some of those into the discussion around doing the actual calculation. So first and foremost, step one is getting all the eligible costs incurred and paid during the 8-week period. So finding our payroll costs, getting the mortgage interest that was paid during that time, the rent, the utilities, gathering all the documentation first and foremost so that we can figure out what we have. It may even take you as the trusted advisor trying to plan that out. What are the payroll periods that are going to hit during the 8-week term? How much of the loan is going to get forgiven based on what we can project out? Do we have to make adjustments to payroll? If we have a restaurant and we had servers who got tips, what is that going to look like? What are the hours that are going to go into that? And we'll talk about FTEs in a minute. But just gathering all that data and doing some pre-planning around that, maybe even talking to the payroll processor if they do have one. If you're doing the payroll, you're going to need to have some of that visionary insight as you do it. But then even as simple as if the payroll is run twice monthly, if they have a semi-monthly payroll, and so our last payroll was April 15th, but we actually got the dispersed funds on April 17th, can I include that April 15th payroll? We are going to make the recommendation that quite possibly, and we want to have a clean cutoff here too, and we don't believe the Treasury or SBA has really kind of looked at this in a clean way. So to say that we are going to start the payroll process from the day that the dispersed funds were received is going to make it an incredible challenge to try and get the right payroll. So we are going to make a recommendation. We have made a recommendation that the wages includable should be all wages following from the following or preceding pay period first day. So if it is the next pay period and we want to use that the first day of that pay, following for 8 weeks, or if it was from the previous pay period and that gets included, to have that 8-week pay period include that through the last day of the 8-week period that's included in that last day payroll. So there is some of this incurrence and paid concept. We're trying to get that language cleaned up a bit. We're not there yet, and until we see something from SBA, it'll be difficult. But what we're trying to get to is actually allowing for these payroll processors to be able to provide very clean and easy reports that can be used by the clients to take to the bank and say, okay, this is what we have, and then it makes it a little easier on matching for FTEs, the individual employees, and then what we're looking at when we have to do some comparisons against a 12-week pay period on a 941 comparison to an 8-week time period of what we're using on the payroll. So trying to get all that figured out. So step one, gathering all that information. Step two, calculating the payroll costs. I said this early on. The intent of the program was to pay payroll, to keep employees on the payroll. So they're saying that 75% of the eligible costs have to go towards payroll. So your gross payroll wages, plus vacation time and all that, plus your health, plus your retirement, if any, gets all includable in that amount. So whatever loan amount we have to spend at least 75% of that on payroll costs. There are no exceptions to that, but as we do that calculation, there are some that are worried, well, if we fail that test, then none of the loan is forgivable. Some are saying, well, if we fail that test, only the portion up to 75% of the total payroll cost can be included in that. So if we got a $100,000 loan and $75,000 is our cutoff for that, but we only spent $70,000 on payroll, then the $70,000 would be forgiven with the portion, the rateable portion of the utilities and the rent and the like of that. So there would be some loss in forgiveness around that. Again, intent of the program was around payroll costs. Step 3, calculate any decrease in FTEs from the 8-week covered period to the last full payroll period or last full quarter as a comparison. So in this calculation, we're going to be looking at, this one is based on the FTEs. You have the choice of either the last payroll quarter or the same period in 2019. So the same 8-week period in 2019 compared to the FTEs. We are making the recommendation that FTEs are calculated based on 30 hours. So any employee over 30 hours a week would be 1 FTE. And then we take all of the employees that are below 30 hours, you add up those hours, and you divide by 30 to come up with your additional FTEs, your half FTEs, your quarter FTEs that would calculate the remaining factor. Again, this is our recommendation. We're hoping to make that generally accepted, but absent guidance currently, that is the direction that we're taking with the Payroll Coalition, and the payroll processors are all in agreement or getting to agreement. We'll have final agreement of the coalition this evening when we present that, but that's kind of the indicator of where we're going. And then another test you have, step 4, is calculating reduction in payroll for any employee who was paid less than 75% of what they were paid in the prior quarter. So obviously this is going to be only for current employees, so if someone left during the prior quarter, no longer an employee, they wouldn't count. Or if we hired someone that wasn't in that prior quarter, obviously that doesn't count. There's the $100,000 limitation. You take all those employees out before you do the calculation. And again, we're working with the payroll processors, the providers, to come up with a fairly seamless report to be able to report that out as part of this overall report that's done. And then finally, this last one, and this is the one that's confused me the most, is calculate any adjustment because FTEs and the salaries and wages were restored by June 30th. So basically, step 5 says if the company restored everybody back full-time by June 30th and paid them what they were getting paid before, step 3 and step 4 are ignored. That's the way we're reading it currently. Doesn't make a lot of sense, but that is one that we're saying, you know what, generally accepted. That's a tough one to try and pull off. We really don't know where the intent were. The others were assuming positive intent, trying to get to generally accepted. That one makes it really hard. So that's where we are on forgiveness. I'm sure there's plenty of more questions around that. We do have hotlines. We have a chat feature, and we have a online feature. So if our team currently are not getting to your questions now, there are additional hotline remedies for you down the road. So with that, Eric, I will turn it back over to you.
So Eric, maybe I could just jump in on a couple of points just to reiterate, watching some of the questions scroll. Mark, one, you might want to at some point in this seminar to go back to the pay period point, because that question certainly, as you talked about the beginning of the pay periods, there was a lot of questions that came onto that. But I want to make a point, and I want to reiterate a philosophy. What we are trying to do is, we know, back to my opening comments, the gray area that's going to exist. We're trying to apply what we all know as professional accountants, generally accepted. And we're trying to offer that to the coalition, the people who are involved in this process, the banks, the payroll processors, et cetera, where we don't have specific answers through Treasury or the SBA. And, you know, we're also sharing those with the Capitol Hill, with the agencies, so that hopefully they can rally around what we're offering is generally accepted answers. And that's really what Mark was working you through. And that's a bit of a risk on our part. But we feel like there's some gap that's there, there's void, and that's really what we're trying to do. And we did do that on the application process too, under the intention that this should be a relatively simple application process. Well, now we're into the forgiveness part, and there's some generally accepted answers that we're trying to put forward and rally all the people around. And then I'd like to cover just one other point that I think is an incredibly important one, and I did see a couple of questions related to this. And this is the 8-week issue combined with basically government shutdowns that exist in many places in the country. Now, some of those things are opening back up. But if we take the restaurant, we all would agree restaurants have been, significantly impacted and shut down in a lot of the country. The issue is if, under the current interpretations, and in fact it does go back potentially to definitions in the law, which makes it more difficult, the 8 weeks runs from your funding when you actually receive the money. If we go back to the intent is pay people. Now we can't pay people. We're shut down. There's not anything to really bring these people in for, and they're already on unemployment. And so we have the 8 weeks that have started to run, that every day is one more day in the 8 weeks. And the small business is losing the flexibility on that environment. And so our issue is that we're trying to raise the profile of this very important thing that will cause particularly the most hard-hit businesses that have been shut down, essentially. Maybe with a restaurant you have takeout food, but essentially have been shut down. To say, shouldn't there be a rethink as to how the 8 weeks run? And if our goal is about employment and our goal is about these small businesses making it through this crisis, then we ought to have some more flexibility in how that 8 weeks run. Now, there are people all over the place talking about all kind of flexibility rules, and I think you should be aware of that. We're trying to keep it simple and saying, maybe if you've been shut down, your 8 weeks should start at a different time. Maybe it should start when you're given permission to open back up instead of when you actually receive the funding. Now, we haven't gotten that answer. It's not something we can do on our own. So don't act on that. But what we're telling you is that is a really critical issue when you apply what's happening in the real world to the intent. And we are trying to get the right people to try to come to a conclusion, because we think that will help small business, especially small businesses who have been closed, very significantly in having whatever their loan amount is to get into a position of being a forgiveness. So that's an example, and there's probably 10 different examples where we're trying to make those types of points. Some we can do through generally accepted. The one I just gave you in the 8 weeks, it's not going to work that way. It's not. And so we just want you to be aware of that. That's the top of our list, and it is something that we are really working on.
Thanks, Barry. I mean, absolutely, and that's something that we're hearing a lot about. And just one, as I mentioned at the start of today's webinar, we're working on communication with you and with everybody. And Mark just, shared a very good overview of where we're looking at loan forgiveness. And we do have this document. It's the AICPA recommendations document around the PPP application and now forgiveness process. It's actually 4 pages now. We are leveraging this document, which you can find on the AICPA PPP Resource Center site, in a way that we give it out to our coalition, and we're also giving it to the lending community. And we think this is something that you can leverage when you're working with some new banks that are coming online, saying, hey, this is what the lender document should be. If for some reason they're asking for a FAT file or documents they shouldn't be asking for. And then the same thing here on the forgiveness, we're going to try to really communicate what is the common approach, the consistent approach, and we'll continue to update that document. And the point Barry just made, if that comes to fruition, we will quickly update that into this document, and you can use that as a tool in your discussions with lenders and with others. So now let's move. We've got a bunch of questions we want to get to, so we'll probably pick up the pace a little bit here. But this is a big one. I've seen a couple of questions come in on this. How can we modify existing PPP applications based on the recent information? And one of the big items is related to partnership client questions. There actually was a question that came in related to the forgiveness process. So if could you put the partnership income in as part of your forgiveness calculations? So Mark, am going to throw this to you just to kind of talk broadly about what you're hearing about from the partnership client questions. And I think the advice right now hasn't changed from last week. We are pushing hard to get more guidance on this, but the current advice from SBA is do not cancel or pull an existing application. Speak with the lender. They've got discretion in this process, and document this input. But Mark, why don't you provide a little bit more perspective related to these kind of discrepancies and the need to correct these applications?
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, so especially on the partnership aspect, and I think the final rule, the temporary final rule from Treasury and SBA on partnerships came out with the self-employed. Now keep in mind, self-employed opened up on April 10th, and then the following Wednesday is when SBA and Treasury actually came out with guidance on the self-employed and snuck in where we were getting hundreds, if not thousands, of questions around partnerships because, again, lack of consistency in the marketplace. Some banks would say include partner income as part of the partnership filing for the loan application, and then others would say, no, the partners are going to have to file individually. That didn't make a lot of sense to us, but that's what some we're hearing in the market. We were trying to get guidance on that. It finally came out on Wednesday, and then, of course, on Thursday, the money ran out. So any adjustments, we had once that guidance came, a lot were asking, do we amend the current filing that was done already? And our advice at the time was, I would not touch the application that's already in there, because if you pull that out, does that mean you go to the back of the list? We could not get answers, and that would have put big risks on the client. Ultimately, from perspective, even if they don't fix what we want to see fixed and say, okay, yeah, you can amend and get the partners in there, and they're going to run out of money again on this next round. So whether or not you get those applications in will be another story. If nothing else, it will be much easier to satisfy the 75% payroll requirement because the application would have been based on employees only, and the forgiveness will be based on including partners in that. There's nothing that says that we can only get reimbursed or forgiven based on the employee set that we showed at the time that we did the application. That application of average monthly payroll times 2.5 was an estimate. That's it. They weren't asking for individual names. So now that we're at the forgiveness phase, whatever we did have in payroll for the partners that wasn't included can be included in the forgiveness calculation. So while we don't have an answer now, if for nothing else, telling our clients that it's going to be that much easier to be forgiven, I think is a good conversation to have.
Thanks, Mark. And, our understanding right now is that there will be more guidance related to this, so stay tuned. Moving on to another hot topic, and this is related to providing advisory services related to the Broad CARES Act and PPP and the agent fee. So we reviewed this on last week's webinar, but we can tell you that this keeps coming back, so we wanted to discuss it again. And first off, it is critical, as we've been discussing, for the firm to play this trusted advisor role, to sit down and discuss with their client what is the right small business relief package related to independence considerations. You can accept the agent fee, and that in itself will not impair independence. If you sign the PPP application, you will impair independence, so clearly for test clients, take that into consideration. And then we're also advising that you have an engagement letter, like we always do, to outline the services you are providing And we have stated that due to the fact that you have to sit down with the client and talk about the broad array of business relief, that there's many things that fall outside of the filling out of the application. This is back to Barry's earlier point. There's judgment here. You have to decide how you want to go about this for your practice. Barry, I know you've talked to some firms on that. Do you want to quickly provide your perspective here?
Yeah, I think, again, you know, it is a judgment call. I think on the signing, clearly, vast majority of firms are not doing that. But I do think that, you know, some firms see it, or maybe I would say a large majority of firms see it as this advisory relationship, doing the work and helping the client sort through, particularly when you think about the multitude of different options from the SBA. And I think most firms are, you know, working in that direction. But that's not to say there aren't some that are you know, making a different decision and working with the banks in that environment. So it is truly open to you. I do think the trusted advisor notion, this is obviously, this is the theme of today, a lot of unanswered questions. And so if the client circumstances allow it, to really have the type of relationship to talk about and help them think through the strategies and the risk and the opportunities, is, you know, probably those firms are erring on the side of not focusing on the agency fee as much. And I do think this is a time when you build a really long-term client relationship by helping them through these gray areas.
Thanks, Barry. And just a final comment here. We're going to be issuing a statement today regarding the firm-lender relationship, and we've reviewed this with some of the banking community and our coalition. We do understand that some of you are looking for support related to just the relationship with the lending community. So hopefully this statement that we reviewed with others will be helpful, and that will be also on the Resource Center. So let's now move to this discussion around self-assessment of need and FOIA and everything that you've been hearing in the press over the last couple of days. And we're also going to talk, the next slide here, we'll talk about a recent FAQ which is related to this. But just real quickly, the information that's in the PPP application falls under the Freedom of Information Act, so that information will be disclosed as you're seeing it getting disclosed right now. Right at the start of this process, we talked about the self-assessment of need, a very important risk management discussion for you to have with your client. And we're well aware, it's happening right now, that there's going to be scrutiny, future scrutiny, there's scrutiny today occurring related to who applied, and this is going to be done both by governmental agencies as well as external parties. So why don't I just move to this next slide, and then we'll have a little bit of discussion on it. It's a hard one to read. It just happened this morning. We quickly threw it into this presentation. This is FAQ 31 that came out from Treasury, and it states some things related in particular to large companies, and that if I'll just read it here, borrowers still must certify in good faith that their PPP loan request is necessary. Specifically, before submitting a PPP application, all borrowers should review carefully the required certification that current economic uncertainty makes this loan request necessary to support the ongoing operations of the applicant. It then goes on to talk a little bit about the public company entity. So this is something that is right in line with that self-assessment of need that we discussed, and this is an important discussion for you to be having with your client. Barry, Mark, I'll just open it up to either one of you.
So Eric, I'm sorry, Mark, let me just hit it real quick. Eric, you and I did a video, I think it might be 3 weeks ago now. We were really early on this issue, saying that as part of your work with a client, or if you're in an employment in a business, that is just something that you should be thinking about, that this will be public. I don't think the answer to this question, changes the notion at all that it's a self-assessment, but it is a self-assessment by the business owner, essentially, that says that we have been hurt. That doesn't mean that it's it's impossible to get there. And I just sort of a notion to think about it in the right way. And I think that's the message that Eric and I delivered 3 weeks ago. This is part of what you should be, from a risk management perspective, talking to a client about. The only other thing that I would add is that you're going to continue to see and hear a lot of, some examples in the media, and that probably will continue well into next week as people continue to, raise examples with the media. At some point, that will probably move to sort of less of importance compared to something else that's happening in the environment. But it will also come back a year from now or 2 years from now. So, the notion that people will be critical of that will be there, including potentially Congress later, even though people are doing a self-assessment in accordance with the law. And it's just something to be, I think, very mindful of and to really think through it. And I won't give examples, but we could all think of small businesses today that probably aren't impacted. And there's an awful lot of them that are impacted. And so I think it's just, it's just an awareness point. And I think this answer sort of just elevates that awareness. And frankly, we've been saying that for multiple weeks.
Thanks, Barry. So we'll keep going here, and we'll be posting that information that just came out today on the Resource Center as well. So how does PPP interact with other relief options? And this is something that we are hearing from firms that they're having this discussion with their clients. There's some private not-for-profits that are deciding that potentially, even though they could qualify for PPP, that the employer retention credit, the ERC, may be more appropriate. So this is something that we just want to make sure that everyone is not, just thinking about PPP. Clearly, that is a very significant program, over $600 billion now in funding. But these other elements are pretty significant. That employer retention credit is something that we think is going to be heavily leveraged, heavily utilized, and there's lots of questions on that. And there was just a letter sent by the AICPA tax team to Treasury and SBA on that, and I think the IRS as well. So, Mark, do you want to comment a little bit further on this?
Yeah, I think this is the key to the trusted advisor, and it was hard because everything happened so fast, and I think everyone focused on the first come, first serve aspect of the PPP loan. But there are these other things, and this even goes back to the agent fee conversation, Eric, that you were having before, that before we could even decide that the PPP was right, now with this additional guidance to say, on the uncertainty, it made it necessary, there might be easier things or better things for companies to apply for. So if in the employer retention credit, as an example, you can't take that and the PPP loan. So have we done the analysis with the client? When the client says, I need a PPP loan, but do they? Is it walking into Home Depot asking for a drill bit for a nail, right? So that's where the trusted advisor has to have the conversation. And so if we're going to analyze all the different programs that are out there with the client, yeah, it's going to take a little more time, but let's sit down, let's have that conversation. And in order to do that, then you'd have to calculate what the average monthly payroll is and say, okay, here's what the benefit would be for PPP loan, but then you got to think of the PR aspect and the risk around that. Here's what you would get in the employee retention credit. All these things. And this is why we kept saying for the agent fee that if you're going to be the trusted advisor, you're not assisting in the application process if you're having that conversation up front to even decide what the right program is.
Thanks, Mark. So this is just kind of a summary of what we've been discussing. The 4 key steps, what Mark was just saying, determining the right program and eligibility, and then moving to gather the document set and calculate the relief amounts for that particular program, completing the application, and then where we're all really moving to right now is supporting the compliance for the relief granted, the forgiveness documents, or if it's related to some tax filings on the employee retention credit. So this is how we're thinking about it broadly. One thing that we're not talking about today, but we're going to start talking about, is just the restart of the businesses and tools and techniques around that. Barry, comment just on these key steps before we kind of move to a little bit of a lender discussion and just some concluding remarks before we just go into Q&A.
I won't belabor the point. I would just like to thank, even now before we get into the Q&A, just the amount of effort that, the questions coming in from our members, our team that's answering, and really, this is hard work, just like it's hard work for everybody in every business right now. And it's our desire to get you as many answers as we can, and hopefully we can give you enough direction that you can give the right advice. And the relationship with the bank, Derek, you've been lead on that, among other things, and I think that's really critical. We're trying to give you that platform to really deliver for your small business clients, which will lead to what Eric just said, the restart of the economy, and that's really our goal here.
Thanks, Barry. So just on the lender activities, we're in constant communication with them. There's 5,000 available lenders now. I think you've all seen a lot of the fintech lenders start up. We were talking about that last week. They are now taking non-customers, so that's one avenue for you to look at. And with some of these newer lenders coming on board, there's going to be a learning curve for them. So leveraging some of these standard documents should help. And as I said, we just issued that statement today, and that will be posted on our resource center shortly. So nothing else there. I think we kind of have all been talking about this. What we'll do now is let's see, Lisa, if you could just give us a few patterns of the questions, and let's tackle a couple of those live.
Absolutely. I'm going to address one really quickly, though. Can the AICPA create an FAQ list? And you'll find that FAQ list specifically related to the PPP on the aicpa.org/SBA page. And then we also have FAQs around some of the tax provisions of the CARES Act within the Tax Resource Center. So once we get to some of the resource slides, you'll be able to find those links as well. We've gotten a couple of questions around engagement letters to use with assisting clients and whether or not we have a standard engagement letter. I'll throw that out to you.
Mark?
Lisa?
You can, I always refer to your professional liability provider for standard engagement letters, and there have been some great resources coming out from Aon on what to make sure is included in your engagement letter. So you can send us an email at pcps@aicpa.org, and we can get you some of those risk alerts that have come out.
So, I will say, because in anticipation of what's about to come, and I know we were so focused on getting the application out, we beat up on agent fees now for 2 weeks, as Eric has mentioned. But the bigger thing is going to be the verification on the back end. We are talking to the banking community, to Treasury SBA. Many of you are familiar with a quote-unquote comfort letter. It's not something we're a big fan of. But in this instance, in crisis mode, there are some things that we really need to kind of take control of. So we are working internally for some level of a CPA certification of the information that's provided. Not that you're going to make the opinion on need or uncertainty or any of that. And we are going to have an engagement letter up front. So it'd be an agreed upon procedures or an advisory services type of calculation. And so we will provide examples of both, and both will have sample engagement letters and would have the actual sample report that you would provide either to the client or to the bank, depending on who it is that engages you to provide that. We do anticipate that it may be the lender who's asking firms to do it, and it may be the client who's asking their firm to do it. And in either instance, we will provide those examples as we get closer to that.
We've also gotten several questions around what is included in utilities and transportation more specifically. I have referred to the second interim final rule that came out, a couple of weeks ago. I don't remember the exact date. And there is a specific section that says business utility payments includes the cost of electricity in the warehouse you rent or gas you use driving your business vehicle. So that is what I've seen as I reviewed the specific guidance around the definition of transportation costs in that utility category. So hopefully that'll answer some of the questions. The guidance doesn't have anything else that I've seen, but just wanted to give you that specific answer. And boy, have I had fun reading the interim final rules 8 to 10 times each.
Hey, a good one that just on the forgiveness loan calculation. It is under step 1 of the loan forgiveness calculation you reviewed. What does any EIDL to be refinanced mean? Is that the 10K EIDL grant? So why don't you just expand on that?
I can do that.
It is.
Basically,
go ahead, Lisa.
Yeah. If you've taken out an EIDL during that specific time, it's up to the borrower to decide if they want to refinance that into the PPP loan, or if they're going to use the funds for a different purpose, they can keep the EIDL. Hopefully that helps answer the question.
So
any other directional?
Yeah.
We're also getting questions about bonus payments. Are those included in eligible payroll costs? I don't know if you have thoughts.
I don't know if I have an answer for that. I mean, if it's something typical, that's the interesting piece, that if we were to use, where we have the choice of using either the 8-week period of 2019 or the most recent quarter for the comparative of payroll, I mean, that's where I would use the comparative quarter, especially if bonuses had been canceled. So typically, if, there's a bonus calculation for year-end bonuses, but we pay that in the April 15th payroll, as an example, obviously that's going to skew it if we already got our funding. So, whichever comparative, I would say, works to our advantage in that, because if 2019's bonus was double what we were going to pay in the 2020 check, obviously that's not going to work in our favor. So there hasn't been any guidance to say that bonuses can't be included, or how we can pay the 8 weeks for the employees either. There hasn't been guidance one way or the other. So they're just saying that you need to pay the payroll during that period.
Well, again, thanks for these questions, because this is very helpful. We categorize all of these, and these help drive the resources that we're putting out on online and through other medium. Lisa, anything else before we move to our final slides?
No, just one quick point of clarification. The answer about utilities specifically related to questions around transportation. Other utilities are eligible. So I was just trying to answer the question around transportation.
Thanks. Well, thanks, Lisa, to you and your team here. So just, we've already made the comments here on the overall role. I mean, it's a time for relevance. We're just hearing so many, good comments from our overall community on the critical role that the firms are playing, the 44,000 firms are playing to navigate through all of this for their business clients. So this is the resource center that we've been talking about, aicpa.org/SBA. There's documents, the banking, the lender, firm relationship documents going up today. By hopefully end of today, we'll be publishing a new forgiveness process document that will be attached to the application document recommendations that we've put out over the past couple of weeks. So definitely keep checking back for more information. We also have a tax resource center. Mark, Lisa, I don't know if there's anything you want to add just to those two slides.
We are constantly updating we're just constantly updating as new information comes out. So just continue to check that.
Yeah, well said.
We are going to have another town hall next Thursday at 3 p.m. We also are putting on a webcast that just talks about the new normal that we're operating in. It steps out of just this CARES and PPP discussion. And in some ways, what's happened with this pandemic is that it has driven us almost 5 years ahead in some ways around the use of technology. So what does this all mean? We're talking about how what's next and now has been kind of compressed by this Black Swan event. So I'll be discussing this with Pascal Finette, who is someone who's been really working with us to try to help firms navigate the future. So that will be a digital CPA webcast next Friday that we'll send out some information to all attendees on. And here's just the overall wrap-up and our next steps. We're going to continue to make the updates to the different resource centers. We're going to continue to have these town halls. The next one, as I said, next Thursday, April 30th at 3 p.m. We'll send out the registration link to all of you. Thank you so much for your time today. Mark, I'll let you have some concluding remarks before I move this to the final survey slide.
Great, thanks, Eric. And I just want to highlight, as Eric said, that navigating under the new normal at some point. I know it may not feel like it today, but when we get past all this PPP forgiveness calculations and the verification, once all that's over, our clients are going to need us more than ever. It's not, our value is not filling in boxes and putting together worksheets. It's going to help them navigate. Many of your clients are going to get to the point where they need to rethink their business model now because they've been forced into things, and this is definitely going to be well into their future. So please start thinking about your role as trusted advisor to your clients and what that arrangement can look like, because it is not hours times rate. It is not filling out a tax return. They are going to need your help more than ever as we come out of this. So with that, I want to thank everyone for listening to us today.
Thanks, Mark. And I'm going to thank you for Barry Melanton as well. He had to jump to another presentation he's giving. So thanks from Barry. Thanks from all of us. We look forward to staying in touch with you. Thanks for your time today. See you next week. That's all for now. Bye.